Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here in such a great interdisciplinary crew, as we say, in the academic world. And Holly was very kind to thank some of us earlier as co-organizers, but she really is the moving force behind all this, so I have to thank her in particular. This is a paper touching on some issues we haven't really gotten into in detail so far today on social media, and basically the impact on social media platforms on the health of democracy, and in particular what it means for the adequacy of our election laws. So I think the emergence and prevalence of social media has meant there are gaps in the current electoral regime, some of which we've tried to fill. Some of that has worked well, some of it less well. The technology's changing, usage patterns are changing. So we're going to dive into all of those issues. I will say, I think Chris and Amir, when he comes back from his coffee run, he's my PhD student, or I'm on his committee, so I feel like the next lesson is going to be get coffee after the panel. They're dealing with harder issues. So I'm not going to talk a lot about the Constitution today, but in the background of all this is the freedom of political expression in the Charter. So there's only so much you can do to regulate political expression online because of the Charter, and that's a good thing overall, right? I'm not criticizing the Charter, but their issues about harmful speech or fake news are very difficult. Okay, because someone's fake news or someone's harmful speech might not be someone else's. I'd like to think the election law campaign finance angle is a little bit easier, because we're building on existing principles that are already there, that have already been found constitutional, which we can already ground in the Canada Elections Act. Okay, so I guess that's my pitch to all of you practitioners, that I'm not a wide-eyed academic radical on this one. Okay, so this is a photo of Matteo Salvini. He may be familiar to you. He's a leader of a populist, far-right, we can talk about definitions all day, political party in Italy, won a large number of seats in the most recent Italian proportional representation election. He gets up to say his first words, and the first things he says as this victorious leader are, thank God for the internet, thank God for social media, thank God for Facebook. Okay, and so as responsible academic researchers, what Matteo Salvini individually, subjectively believes does not necessarily mean that's the truth out there in the world, that political advertising on Facebook has transformed elections. But I think there's actually a lot of credible academic evidence that political parties and interest groups have moved their political advertising in particular online. That includes in Canada, but it's also globally, and especially to Facebook. Okay, so this is about social media in general, but Facebook simply because it's been the most successful of the platforms in garnering advertising dollars. The Canadian electoral regime of law and administration is actually quite a successful one if we compare it to other models around the world. The basic tools in the toolkit are transparency and disclosure rules, right? You know who's donated money to political parties. They have to tell you how much they've spent. Enforcement rules to make sure the other rules are being followed, and then a bunch of rules on spending that basically try to ensure a level playing field, right? So the biggest tool there is spending limits for political parties and interest groups during the election campaign. And there's a lot more to it than that. We've got lots of great people in the room from Elections Canada, but those are kind of the basic tools that are there. We've had warnings, though, from Elections Canada, from CSE, from a number of academic bodies, that the existing set of rules built around those principles of a level playing field, transparency, and fair enforcement are no longer as effective as we want them to be. They're either gaps because they haven't kept up with new technology, or they're being under-enforced because of the complexity of the online world and new technology. So the Cambridge Analytica scandal everyone's familiar with. Colleague Professor Judge will be speaking about voter privacy on the next panel. So the voter privacy panel angle has really been in the news, and I think has kind of penetrated the mass consciousness. But the campaign finance angle is one where there's still lots to do. And C-76, currently before the House of Commons, deals with a number of those issues. There's amendments, I believe, that have recently been approved by the committee yesterday evening. So I'll talk a little bit about C76 at the end. But the current law has gaps, is under-enforced, or is simply out of date in many respects. C76 plugs some of those holes, but not all. So what does social media do actually to political advertising? Well, the first attractive feature of it, if you're a political party, is the cost. Simply costs a lot less to reach a large number of people on Facebook than it does to try to reach that audience through, say, an ad on Hockey Night in Canada. Okay, so, and that's a good thing. It's good to have easier and cheaper forms of political communication between candidates and parties and voters. One of the other important features, though, is micro-targeting. Okay, so if an ad's on Hockey Night in Canada, we can all see it. Okay, and that has a variety of secondary effects. You're less likely as a political party to put out an extreme message on an ad on Hockey Night in Canada because you know others will be looking at it and you can be called out for that, or there may be consequences for broader public opinion for those who aren't primed to have a positive view of the message in the ad. With micro-targeting on Facebook, you can target individuals above a certain income, who have a certain employment, who live in a certain area, who are on the south side of the street and not the north side of the street, who have a certain family structure. So you can be very precise in who sees the ad. Okay, so possibly people who are favorably predisposed to the ad. But also there's no transparency feature. We as a public cannot tell what is in those ads unless those individuals choose to disclose them. And those individuals may not even know how widespread the ad that is being targeted to them is actually being seen. And they may assume actually that it's like an ad on Hockey Night in Canada, but actually the micro-targeting means that is not the case. So the lack of transparency means it's simply harder to enforce the rules because who knows if the ad has actually been transmitted. Who knows what the content is? The answer is partly the social media platforms, but much harder for the regulatory bodies or those of us as external observers to track things. So the cost is lower. Micro-targeting is an important feature. I come at this from the perspective that voluntary measures have proven to be largely inadequate. Facebook, for example, has a repository of political ads in Canada, one of the first countries around the world where it rolled out that feature. We have no assurance that that feature will always be there, okay, because it's voluntary. I don't know if Facebook is using the definition of an election ad in the Canada Elections Act when they're deciding what counts as an ad, and they have a lot of discretion around the time frame. Okay, so we could have better compliance with our underlying electoral rules if the platforms choose to, but the lack of enforceable law until C76 is passed, for example, on the repository is a problem in my view, although there are definitely different opinions on that. The other feature that I think I want to highlight before talking about some policy solutions potentially is the idea of the permanent campaign. So political scientists have long said we have a permanent campaign now in liberal democracies. It's not just during the election campaign period where parties are competing for your votes. That's happening 24/7, 365. Social media has sped that up because you can communicate, advertise in a cheaper fashion directly to voters all year round. So there's an important aspect of the permanent campaign that's tied to social media. The problem is that Canadian election laws, as effective as they may be, the spending limits in particular and a lot of the disclosure rules are tied to the actual campaign period. So 37 days every 4 years. Okay, so that's only a small, and there's constitutional reasons. It gets more restrictive the longer the campaign period that you restrict, but that's one of the features that's maybe shown to be slightly out of date in the Canadian model. Okay. So this I put in the slides while sitting at Morning Owl Coffee Shop at 7:30 a.m. this morning. This is something we would never get Research Ethics Board approval to do as academic researchers. So the good people at Vice News decided to test Facebook's claim to try to weed out foreign interference, foreign political advertising on their platform. Facebook now requests some more information about the source of the ad and then puts that in the ad itself, and then in theory screens for particular content. Okay, so this is an ad from the last US presidential election where Jesus is arm wrestling Satan. I don't know how clearly you can see that. And it says, press like to help Jesus win. And in the fine print, it talks about Hillary being Satan, basically. Okay, so this was an ad we can quite definitively say was promoted by the Russian Internet Research Authority, right, in the last US presidential cycle. Exactly the kind of thing that was not supposed to be allowed anymore on Facebook. So Vice placed that ad on Facebook sometime in the last week or so. The news story came out today. And they put as their source either Mike Pence, Vice President of the United States, or the Islamic State. And Facebook accepted those ads. And now, because of their new policies, it tells you the source of the ad. So you can see that the Islamic State funded the Satan versus Jesus arm wrestling ad this time. So all that is to say, the filters that have been put in place, someone talked about AI earlier, which is a very interesting point. I think there's AI tools here that are not working as effectively as perhaps they're sold as working. So an example of what's actually going on and the potential for foreign interference that's there. Okay, and so electoral authorities in Elections Canada is obviously aware that online advertising has happened and has made some efforts to adapt the rules in the Elections Act through guidelines and interpretation notes. The underlying principle, which I think Elections Canada has properly taken, is to respect individual political expression, right? To not stifle the individual political views of Canadians who want to put out their opinions on Twitter, right, or on Facebook. There's no payment involved. It's simply the expression of views. So that is has quite properly been unregulated. In adapting the regime for paid political ads or election ads, Elections Canada has introduced the idea of a placement cost. So essentially, right, the idea of how much it would cost to get Google to put the ad, right? You Google Mexican vacation, right? And then in your Gmail, about 10 minutes later, there are pop-up ads, banner ads for Mexican resorts, right? So political parties do the same thing. So the placement cost is what the party would pay Google to get that ad there. There are some loopholes available in that, right? What if it's an internal person who's creating these ads that are very sophisticated? And there's a variety of ways that I think actors have tried to find their way around the placement cost rule. Happy to chat more about that. In terms of disclosure, Elections Canada has mandated that there must be disclosure of the source in or on the ad. But that gets quite complicated with an online ad that may be small, right? Hard in the little banner ad for a political party in your Gmail to tell you all sorts of information about the source and the official agent and all that. So you're allowed to click on the link and then go to another website that will then have further information for you. So a lot of users don't actually get the benefit of the source. So what does that mean in terms of policy solutions? So in the paper, this presentation is based on, I propose that all ads on social media should be required to indicate the cost, the source, and then also, I think somewhat more controversially, the search terms. Right, so there's some evidence from U.S. elections that if some people were targeted to see ads because Facebook suggested they would be receptive to racist ads, right? And so we don't have clear empirical evidence on that, but there are some search terms that if political actors engage in that we might find offensive as a matter of political values. And there's a bunch of kind of technical ways you could achieve that kind of real-time disclosure. Social media advertising costs a lot less. So political parties have quite strict spending limits that they face in spending on political advertising, especially during the campaign period. But because social media costs so little, it's very hard to level the playing field. And it sort of levels the TV and radio advertising playing field, but not for social media. So one potential option is to have a separate spending limit for social media spending. Okay. Another would be simply to lower the overall spending limit, but I think that's something that's very difficult to convince political parties of doing, or to get it to a low enough amount that it would make a difference to social media spending when they still have to spend on tour and planes and all those sorts of other things. The most important big change, I think, is to expand the entities under the Elections Act that are regulated. So it's not just political parties, interest group, candidates, leadership contestants, but social media platforms themselves. I think the history of the Elections Act shows it's expanded over time to include, say, robocalling companies after the scandal from the 2011 election. And helpful regulation, which I believe is in the amendments to C76. I'm running out of time, so maybe I won't have enough time to talk about C76, is a mandatory repository of ads. So I believe that's in the amendments that was passed by committee, but happy to be corrected by some of the good people involved in that process. The other issue is, this is the broader issue of telecommunications law. Okay, but Facebook and all social media internet companies resist being broadcasters because that comes with a host of other Canadian content regulations and other types of rules. So I'm not trying to suggest a broad reorientation there, but the Elections Act does deal with broadcasters in the sense that they cannot charge differential rates to political parties, and they have to charge the lowest available rate. So CTV can't say, we like this political party, we're going to charge them $1 for this ad. We don't like that political party, we're going to charge them 10 million. Okay, and there's a very good reason for that rule. So broadcasters don't have an outsized impact. That can occur on Facebook right now, and they very explicitly have the Facebook ad auction algorithm, which is built on the idea that you should have variability in pricing. So I think it's a bit of a black box problem there. They don't tell us what their secret sauce is, what's in the algorithm, but I think on their own advertising of what they're doing, there's variation in pricing that would not be permitted by CTV or CBC. So I've gone a little over time, so I won't talk too much about C76, but happy to discuss it in the Q&A. Thanks very much.
Brilliant, thank you.